Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll be getting started at the top of the hour, maybe a couple minutes after the top of the hour to allow for everyone to join. We'll be with you shortly. Thank you. And Peter, just checking again. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine. My computer won't let me share my webcam for some reason.
No worries. Thanks. We'll be getting started soon. Hi all. Thank you for joining today. We're going to get started in probably just another minute or so. Thanks for your patience. We'll be with you soon. Okay, I think we can get started. Put my into presentation mode. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to the Research Data Alliance's Global Adoption Week and our webinar today focused on data management. My name is Yolanda Melico, Project Director at RDA US and a member of the Secretariat, and I'll be moderating today's webinar along with Daniel Bangert, also a member of the Secretariat and Library at the Guggenheim State and University Library. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are excited to share with you an overview of the adoption projects ongoing and implemented at RDA and provide you the opportunity to discuss these projects with our speakers and determine how best to integrate those data sharing solutions into your own projects. Prior to getting started, I'd like to review a few technical details pertaining to the webinar. First, this webinar is in listen-only mode, meaning you can hear me and you will be able to hear our speakers, but we can't hear you. This prevents everyone on the line from hearing any unnecessary background noise. You are more than welcome to submit questions to us via the question box located in the lower half of the GoToWebinar interface. By you simply typing in a question, we'll be able to see your inquiry and respond. We plan on answering questions after each of the speakers today, but feel free to type in your question at any time. In the case we are unable to answer your questions that come in, we'll definitely follow up with you offline. We'll also be recording the presentation, and the link to it will be posted to the website as well as emailed to you within the next day or so. I would now like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Peter Neish from the University of Melbourne will be speaking about the RDA DMP Common Standard for Machine-actionable data management plans. Rob Quick at Indiana University will be speaking on the SEAGrid Science Gateway and the adoption of the PID kernel information and data type registry. And Cees Hof and Marguerite Medema from the Data Archiving and Network Services, DANS, will be talking about 23 Things Revisited, Field Guides to Research Data Management, which is an adoption project that we've heard of. So without further delay, I will now turn our presentation over to Peter Neish. Peter?
No problem. So I should be able to see my screen. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about the work we've done with machine-actionable data management plans. And this work is through a working group with myself, Tomasz Miksa, and Paul Walk. And we'll have details at the end how you can get involved or if you have further information. So I'll dive right into it. What was the problem we were trying to solve? So data management plans currently have a lot of shortcomings. They're manually completed. They're vague, they're not generally updated. Researchers hate them because they see them as an additional burden on top of all the other work they have to do. They're often completed at the last minute and not particularly valuable. So the other thing is that there's just a lot of questions that don't get answered. So researchers, they might not know which tools to use, which repositories they should put things in. Why do they have to keep putting in the same information again and again? And also infrastructure providers and other service providers, they get consulted at the last minute. Costs are vague, resourcing is vague. So the thing we wanted to do was, if we could make this more machine actionable, so if we could actually automate a lot of these steps, then we could make things more efficient. So stakeholders require information at certain stages, and things get triggered at particular stages in the research data management life cycle. So if the timing is right and we have information flow, we're hoping that we can make the whole exercise of data management planning more useful and more efficient. So an idealized situation might be this, where a researcher starts a data management plan. They put in their type of and size of information that they're collecting, the data. Different service providers may then be able to provide information on the storage required, the cost of that storage, what kind of licensing, and then the data management plan might then get submitted to a funder. So there's definitely potential for automating or providing automated services around a lot of these steps. So machine-actionable DMPs should be living documents, so they should be continually updated. They should collect information from people, but systems as well, and they should trigger actions in different systems and also allow for validation. So if I say, I'm collecting sensitive data from a clinical trial, make sure that the storage meets those requirements. Lots of different scenarios, and I'll talk about some of those as we go on. So the requirement for this is a well-defined data management workflow, and also the infrastructure to allow this, and a common data model, which is where we come in. So the DMP Common Standards is an output that we've created. So it's a common standard for machine-actionable DMPs. So it is there to model information from a standard DMP. It's not necessarily going to be a checklist of every single question that should be asked in a DMP or a template, but it's really designed as a set of minimal information that's needed to transfer information between systems, and allows for specific extensions depending on the domain. And we have released a reference implementation with examples, and I'll show you some of those. So an example here, so on the top half is a current DMP, which asks the question, who is the principal investigator? And the researcher fills out the information. It'll be John Smith from a particular university. And that's fine if that's being submitted to a funder, someone who is reviewing it and can read it. But the machine-actionable DMP in the bottom half of the screen is a lot more potentially useful. So we're using well-known vocabularies, we're using identifiers for systems, and this allows us to unambiguously identify people and institutions, data sets, repositories, a whole lot of entities within this system to allow transfer of information. So the DMP Common Standards Working Group launched in October 2017. This came out of a consultation from the Active Data Management Planning Interest Group. And this working group has, the focus was machine-actionable DMPs, and the interest group, has over 200 members. The people that make the DMP tools, so DMP Online, DMP Tool, Research Data Management Organizer, Data Stewardship Wizard, and there's a whole bunch more, are all part of this interest group. So there's real buy-in from people who own these systems, which is really important. So up until now, we did an initial consultation to gather user stories. That was really to find the scope and who were the particular stakeholders in data management plans. That gathered over 100 user stories, which were categorized. All this work is available, worked in the open, mostly on GitHub. The second consultation, we went on a bit more of a deep dive to look at specific models that were already out there. How can we model specific requirements? We also conducted some proof of concepts early just to test some of the things we were developing, developed some business process notation and modeling to identify how the systems and stakeholders would interact and then went ahead to develop the model. So this is now an RDA output. It's available on the RDA website at this address. Currently undergoing review from the board, but it's there to be used and implemented, and already is being done so. So the model, as well as a high-level architecture, each property has documentation, extensive documentation. There is an FAQ that we constantly update as people are using the standard more, having particular questions, looking at how things are implemented. Some links as well. So all those consultations, you can go back and look at the whole story, how these things were developed, the reasoning, each user story was an issue on GitHub, had great discussion on each of those. There are also examples there, so from simple minimal examples through to more complex cases of data sets, funded, unfunded projects, different things. So you probably can't read that, but that is a minimal data management plan in JSON notation, and that's there to help developers with their implementations of the standard. We have a number of people currently in the process of adopting the standard. So there's a list there. Many of them are DMP tool providers. There are also repositories looking at using the standard to manage data management plans or connect to other systems. Universities, there's a whole bunch of people who are currently either adopting the standard at the moment or in the process of doing so. One of the interesting things we did a couple of weeks ago was a hackathon. So this was the idea behind this, was to get different tool providers, people interested in this standard and how they could use it, to get together into teams. So we had 71 participants, 12 teams from 21 countries. So over 2 days, these people got together online and coded and hacked and produced some prototype documentation and systems to integrate different systems. So integrating tools with repositories, looking at new ways of using the standard, some really interesting work, and that's all up online at the moment. So that was super interesting to see all of that work as well. Yeah, so here's some of the results, and again, these are all available up on GitHub. Different teams collaborated across time zones and across the world to produce some really interesting work, and that was really interesting and interesting to really test the standard, see where it works well, where it may need improving. Yeah, it was good to see that it's being used. So I will finish up now. We definitely have ways that people can keep in touch, or if they're interested in further information or further developments in this area. So the umbrella group is the Active Data Management Planning Interest Group. And definitely, if there's new ideas, that's a great place to raise those. A parallel group to ours was the Exposing Data Management Plans Working Group, which was really looking at how we can make data management plans more open and shared and available to others, and how that would look. And then there's our group, which is the Common Standards Working Group, which is looking at, now that the standard has been done, it's really more about adoptions of the standard, and hence this week's session, but also potentially changes if they're needed at all in the future. So it's easy to join a group on the RDA. I'm sure you'll be able to find that following the links yeah, so would love to have anyone interested on board to join that group and adopt the recommendations. So not just ours, but there are lots of great recommendations. And if you've also used our standard anyway, we'd love to hear from you as well. We're interested in collecting more and more adoption stories because they're what it's all about. There's a few publications around this. We've sort of documented things as we've gone. Yeah, through each stage of the process, we've presented and got really good feedback. So all that is there to look at as well. So that's about it for me. So yeah, definitely check out the GitHub website, check out the RDA group. Please participate in the model adoption. If you have any questions or ideas or adoption stories, please contact us. So Tomasz Miksa is definitely the lead of this work. Paul Walk and myself are all available to be contacted around the Common Standard. So that's it for me, and I'll open up if there are any questions.
Thanks, Peter. Excellent work. Yeah, and we'll be sending you links to a lot of the adoption stories. Peter has one of them as well, some of the videos that's been done. So, but if anyone has any questions, this is the time to ask. We don't have any in the panel right now, but if you have any, just type it in and we'll respond to, we'll have Peter respond to your questions. Okay. Peter, we have one in there. Do you see the questions, Peter? It's what's being asked. What are the next steps beyond this, and how do you plan to update this over time?
Yeah, great question. So the next steps are really probably what I talked about there with potentially domain-specific extensions. So we've really tried to make it minimal to start with. So we're very interested in people who want to extend it or propose adoptions, propose sort of updates to the standard. We're currently looking at setting up a kind of governance group to oversee changes in conjunction with RDA, and definitely with all the stakeholders, particularly the tool developers who really are sort of, you know, the key drivers around a lot of this activity. So the DMP tool, the DMP Online, Roadmap, Data Stewardship Wizard, all of those people are involved and very interested and have an interest in maintaining and keeping the standard going. So definitely, yeah, looking at setting up some kind of governance group to oversee the ongoing maintenance and update of the standard.
Thank you. Okay, so feel free to continue typing in the questions. Peter, you should be able to see them if they come in throughout the hour, but at this point we will turn the presentation over to Rob Quick. Rob, I'm making you presenter now.
Okay, thank you. And I should be unmuted now, and
we can hear you.
The screen that has the SEAGrid on it, and let me get my slides up here. We'll look at this a little bit later, but for those of you not on the East Coast, it is a little after 7 here. I've had dinner, I'm sitting back. So I'm going to approach this talk as if we are meeting at a RDA event after dinner, and you asked me about the RDA Adoption Program or award that I got from RDA US and tell you about that. So hopefully this is relaxed and I'm feeling a little chatty. So please do ask your questions when we're done. But if you were to ask me about the RDA SEAGrid Adoption Program, I would tell you this. So myself, Yu Lao, and Guanchen Ran here at Indiana University were funded by the RDA US to do an adoption project, and this adoption project centered on a science gateway. in science gateways, as they're known in the US, I think virtual research environments in most of Europe. They're known as virtual platforms or virtual environments, I think, in other places. So many names, but in the end, this is just a interface so a researcher can interact with the complex computing infrastructure behind the scenes through either a web interface or a client or something that is friendly and doesn't require the researcher to learn any more computing than necessary to get their research done. So what we've done is taken a gateway, in this case SEAGrid, and I'll tell you more details about SEAGrid in just a moment, and we've used the Rapid infrastructure. Rapid is the robust persistent identification of data, and it's a data infrastructure that allows for the minting of PIDs, for the resolution of those PIDs. It has a data type registry, which is an RDA output, to allow machine-actionable operations on these PIDs, and a protocol called the Digital Object Interface Protocol that allows you to make those operations in a standard way, no matter what infrastructure you're interacting with. So what I'll do here today is tell you a little bit about SEAGrid, then a little bit about Rapid, then a few details of the adoption project, and we'll talk about FAIR and implementing FAIR, at least on the technical side. There are two very different parts of FAIR. One is you can implement with technical services or various different compute services, and then there's some that are very social, and we address the technical ones here. The social ones will leave up to the discipline researchers to determine things like what rich metadata means. We can make the metadata available. It's up to the researchers to make that data meaningful and rich, as it is called in the FAIR principles. So, and then I'll show you a quick demo of how this works within the SEAGrid portal, and then move on to some conclusions. So hopefully I can do all that in about 12 minutes, having used 3 of those minutes already being chatty after dinner. So the scenario we're really looking at here is a researcher who uses a science gateway or a virtual research environment to do their research. And they're concerned with some things, or they may or may not be concerned with some things, some set of these. They're concerned that the digital objects that they both use and produce are observe the FAIR principles. They want the research to be reproducible beyond the science gateway. So if somebody gets a hold of this research who doesn't have access to the science gateway or the same environment, they want to be able to reproduce this or use this research in a reasonable way without having access to a service that may or may not still be available, and then share those steps that they use to do analysis, and not just the data that they produce during an analysis, but all the steps that lead up to the final outputs. And what I think is maybe one of the more likely scenarios is that actually a researcher does his research and then realizes that he wants to tweak it either with new software, with new data, with a modification of the data to be more accurate or more current as things are discovered or changed within that discipline. And they want to tweak one part without having to recreate the entire workflow. So let's review the FAIR principles here very quickly. And this is a slide by Luis Benino from Leiden, who works with Barron and is very familiar with the FAIR principles and works on the FAIR digital objects team. But the things that are marked here in green are what we think can be technically implemented, and the things that are in black or blue, depending on how your screen looks, are the things that are more to take a social agreement or some sort of process that is up to the domain science to really make them happen. So you can see these things. Findable really revolves around PIDs and unique globally available and globally unique identifiers. I'll call those PIDs from here out, or persistent identifiers. The data is being able to be described with metadata, and that can be resolved, and it includes identifiers within the data. The accessible principle says that there's a standard protocol allowing you to access the metadata and data that is used in these output, and that protocol is open, free, and universally implementable. We're using, in this case, the digital object interface protocol, which is part of the handle service that functions on many of the current PIDs. And this protocol allows authentication and authorization. In the example I'm using here, authentication and authorization isn't necessary as all of the data is open, and no authorization or authentication is necessary outside of the gateway itself. And then interoperable, and this is where the data type registry comes in that there's a formal, accessible, shared, applicable language for knowledge representation, and that metadata includes qualified references to both the data and other metadata. So, and reusable, in this case, we don't do much with reusable, but we think if we can get the technical implementations of these items that I've already mentioned underway, then reusable becomes a byproduct of those. So that then talks about the accuracy and the relevancy of the data attributes and things along those lines. So let's talk about SEAGrid. SEAGrid is the Science and Engineering Application Grid. This has been active for about 5 years now, does various different science and engineering applications within a gateway. And I'll show you a very simple interaction with that today, but there are about 50 applications and some very interesting workflows in here, a lot of chemical modeling, which is what I'll show today, but then many other applications that focus around the science and engineering aspects. So, and it was built with Apache Area Avada middleware framework. This middleware framework is a Apache open source project and a top level project. It really is a framework that allows these science gateways to be built. The good thing about this is once we do it for one Apache Area Avada gateway, we can then replicate this in the many other Apache Area Avadas. IU itself hosts about 40 of these for various different researchers, and there are others located throughout the world. We can also make best principles and a small set of software that allows the interaction with the Rapid Testbed, which I'll talk about next, available to people who are running gateways that are not necessarily based on this Apache Area Avada middleware. And the adoption that we did was centered on small molecules and fluorescent properties. So this was a science-specific work case. What they want to do is at the end of the workflow be able to publish the details of the workflow to a site called fluorophobes.org, something along those lines, but basically where fluorescent chemicals are kept in a repository for people to search and download and act upon. So what is Rapid? Rapid is a cyber infrastructure for minting, resolving PIDs. It also has a data type registry and a protocol, as I mentioned earlier, for operations on the digital objects that are represented by PIDs. Basically, it's a cyber infrastructure to implement some of the technical components of the FAIR principles. Now, that's very simplified, but I think that in the end, if you were to bubble it down or dilute it down to a single sentence, that's the goal of having these PIDs, is to really allow FAIR data and interoperability to happen on data objects. So this leverages several RDA outputs and recommendations, including the PID kernel information strawman profile, the data type registry, and it heavily leverages the work done within the data fabric working group, where the data fabric working group was basically centered around making the services that are part of the RDA outputs into a single service. So we pulled together not only the PID kernel information and data type registry, but the PID information types and some other works, and tried to make an infrastructure or a persistent service that was based on several of the outputs, along with some other components necessary to make this this fabric of data services. The testbed itself was funded by the National Science Foundation in the US, and it is ongoing and will be available at least while the grant ends in October of this year. We've committed to running it for 2 years beyond that, so anybody who wants to see what the data cyber infrastructure looks like, this is available, and there's more at the link there. The RDA Adoption Project was a six-month project that basically said we were going to take this gateway and make it interact with the Rapid services to provide a fair science gateway. So you can see from the structure here that PIDs are assigned not only to the initial data inputs, but any pre-processing, any intermediate data products, and then any analysis along with the software. And there's a new group that we hope to leverage that does PIDs for software that has started up or is starting up very soon, that I think that we'll also leverage in the end. And then putting PIDs basically through the entire life cycle of the data services. So I see I'm at 12 minutes, so I'm not going to do a demo as I had planned since I've been talking too long. But really, here's the very simplest output, or the very simplest workflow where you have a single output, a set of software, or I'm sorry, a single input, a set of software, and some output. And what this does as you go through the SEAGrid portal, it assigns the initial overall workflow a persistent identifier. It breaks that up into 3 separate sub PIDs, one that describes the input, one that describes the software, one that describes the output, and those then have individual PIDs, including the, in this case, it's small molecules, so there's a charge and the coordinates are the basics of the data, but then the machine readable objects that are sent for analysis, along with various different things like the software versions. And with the output, you not only get the standard out, but you get the logs and error messages, so you can review them if necessary. And each of these are assigned a PID that is accessible outside of the gateway. And I think that's the really important part here, is you don't have to have access to the gateway to learn about the workflow and the metadata. So I was going to do a demo, as I said, here, but I won't do that since I see I'm at 13 minutes already, and I'm trying really hard to stay to 12 minutes. If there's not time for this demo, I put an example here in the slides that you can look at and see what one of these workflow PIDs look like. From there, you can drill down into the input, the software, the output, and the individual metadata pieces. So conclusions here. SEAGrid has been integrated with the Rapid Testbed services to implement the fair science workflows. Right now, we have completed that development. What we're doing is exercising the system to make sure there are no unexpected items. We hope to do tens, if not hundreds, of these small molecules and see if we run into any oddities within this workflow. And these, again, are fluorescent molecules. Or at least it looks at the fluorescent properties of the molecules. The workflow PIDs describe the components of the computational process. So basically, with these PIDs, you can recreate the entire computational workflow. Though I don't think we would see anybody trying to recreate the entire workflow. What we would see is somebody trying to mix and match new data, software parameters into a previously used workflow, and they could do that by replacing a PID with another separate PID that describes something else. And there's no access to SEAGrid to look at this metadata or to find out about the software or the analysis. I think this directly impacts, as I showed on the FAIR slide earlier, the FA and I principles, not so much R, as R has several things that are community enforceable, not necessarily technically enforceable. And with this, you can extend both the metadata and to other gateways. Once we have this work completed and we show that it is useful to the researcher, this can easily be rolled into, as I said, the 40 or so gateways that are hosted here at Indiana University, but then other gateways, and we hope to produce both best practices and a set of software that allows this to easily be added to other gateway workflows. And most importantly, this project leverages several outputs, and I didn't talk about the details of those outputs other than to show what those outputs led us to creating at the top level for the researcher. So, and none of this work could have happened without the RDA community and the work within the data fabric group, the PID kernel information group, the data type registries, the PIT, or the persistent identifier typing group, and there's a few others there that I think we'll leverage in the long term. So I'm sorry I ran about 16 minutes. I apologize for being a little too chatty, but I will end it there and take any questions.
Thanks, Rob. Great work. Yeah, this is the first time we're getting to see it from the US side, so we're looks great. We'll be getting a lot of this information on the RDA website as well. Any questions for Rob? Okay.
So I see 2 questions in there that my slides are not in presentation mode. And I apologize if you saw my more than my entire screen. And then it looks like Andrew has a question. And if this is, I hope this is not for the previous talk that I'm seeing these questions just now, but yeah,
Andrew asked a question from the first session, from the first one.
So Andrew's question may have been about the data management planning and not necessarily about this work. So I won't answer that unless I see it again.
Okay, you're right. Okay, so at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Cees Hof, and he will be speaking about 23 things. Hi, Cees.
Good morning to everybody. From Amsterdam, late at night. We are heading for 2 o'clock in the morning, so slightly different conditions than Rob just canvassed.
Thanks for being here.
It's a very quiet night evening, actually. Getting pretty warm already. Yeah, my name is Cees Hof. I work for the Royal Academy, the Netherlands Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, and this morning Mijke Jetten, my colleague, provided the first presentation, and tonight it's myself and Margriet Miedema, who's actually helping me in the session and is ready to take your questions. Today, I'm going to talk about our project, 23 Things We Visited, Field Guides to Research Data Management, and this was also one of the RDA adoption projects. You see the 3 names of us here, but please keep in mind that this was the effort of a large team, a large group of people, and we are only the one that presented the results in this webinar. Okay, the next slide. So, adopting the 23 things by the Dutch community, this was the main focus of our project. I think most of you will know what the 23 things are. It's a nice series of tips and tools for research data management. It's already a 5 years old piece of work, and providing guidelines for basically people in libraries managing data. And the core of this project was creating a kind of updated version of 23 things, also specifically implemented at the national level, a national community. And new to this concept was also adapting 23 things to different user communities that we selected throughout the project. Why implementing this project? Well, we thought that working on this together as a community really improved our national cooperation at the level of research data management and created a common understanding of what we actually mean by research data management amongst the different communities and amongst the different institutes. It was a project that covered almost a year. In July, we are officially finishing the project. And it was all coordinated by our national coordination point on research data management that's actually being chaired by Mijke, who's joining in this session. I will very briefly summarize the project. I will then introduce you to some of the results of the project, and we end this session by means in which you can actually contribute to the developments and the future of the project. So we recognize 4 very clear phases in the project. The first phase was the creation of this Dutch nationwide commitment. And I think it's a crucial element of the project. By involving a large community, a large group of people in the beginning, writing the implementation plan, we created a lot of commitment from the early beginning on, and also created this sense of ownership amongst the people that were joining the project. All the results of the 4 phases are actually available online. Also, the implementation plan is a document that you can actually find in Zenodo. The link is provided in this slide. And also the other phases of the project are already available and published, most of them in Zenodo. Phase 2 was, of course, one of the most interesting aspects of the project: how to adjust the 23 things, the original 23 things, how to update the information, how to customize 23 things for different user communities, and how to settle this at the national level. The way we assembled the information, and we created and assembled the information through organizing sprints. I think altogether there were 7 sprints organized, in which altogether about 50 people participated. And within these sprints, it was a very much of a bottom-up approach. We simply asked people, and these people were data stewards, data managers, sometimes people involved in policies, sometimes people actually involved in research or funding, how they envisage the 20 things for their institute or their community. It was very much of a bottom-up approach, and we really yielded a lot of information from the people involved, a lot of energy, a lot of thoughts, and a lot of commitment. So the information for 20 things was updated by some recent developments, because as I just mentioned in the beginning, the original 20 things is dating from 2015. And since then, new items appeared on the horizon, like fair data, a lot of focus on things like EOSC in Europe, the European Open Science Cloud, focus on GDPR issues, focus on reproducibility of science. So we asked all the community to update this information. And next to that, an interesting process was to ask the people that joined the sprints to recognize these different communities for which the information would be relevant. And altogether, we kind of ended up with the concept of 7 different communities that should be provided by their own 23 things information. The third phase that we are actually in right now is how do we get the concepts that we developed adopted. Unfortunately, the COVID crisis was a bit of a bummer in this process, because it was not possible for us to actually go there out to meet people at events or workshops and talk about the 23 things. So a bit of the output has been changed to a digital format and can still be used, but real interaction with communities was unfortunately lacking. And the fourth phase is the phase that we are heading for right now, is to disseminate the experiences that we gained. How was the interaction? What did people think? How was the energy within the communities? Why did we distinguish these 7 different stakeholder groups? And how are we going to maintain this information in the near and distant future? So the sustainability of the project. So this was a lot of the ways the process, the way we tackled the problems and the issues, and we now move to some of the practical output of the project. And to make it to visualize this very easily, on this slide you see actually the information sheets that we created. And for each of the 7 communities that we recognized and that are also visualized on this slide, we created their own 23 things information sheets. So there is a 23 things information sheet for bachelor and master students. There is a 23 things for data and subject librarians for all these different communities. All this information is also available in Zenodo, and actually we are developing some very basic training modules in which you can use this for your own community. However, this is of course a very static way of catching the information. And with all this information that we gathered, we decided it would also be very useful to put the information in a database, and on top of the database, provide an interactive site that you can also use to gather the specific information for your community or your topic. So we ended up with a website. The URL is provided on this slide. Keep in mind, it's work in progress. It's not perfect yet. It's not complete yet. But this website you can actually use to filter the information you want by choosing your audience, by choosing your theme, choosing the type of information, whether it's literature, tools, recommendations, and you can also select the data lifecycle that you are in, and that's relevant for the information you are gathering. I think the most easy way to demonstrate this by using a user story, and I introduce you to Boris. Boris is a postdoctoral researcher at the Technical University of Delft. He has shared his code with one of his PhD students, and she now asks him how she should actually cite his code or his software in her thesis that she's about to publish. Well, Boris goes to the website. He chooses his audience, so he's a researcher, so he chooses the researchers and PhD candidates. Next step is that he selects the theme, and very conveniently there is a very appropriate theme for Boris. That's citing data and code. So that's the next selection he made, and then he ends up with 2 units of information that he can use to provide a proper citation for his data, for his code and software. And if you then click through these 2 items, you actually end up with 2 websites. One is a website of Fair Software. It's a product from the Netherlands. And one of the 5 steps to make your software fair is citing your software in a proper way. And this website will help you to make the proper choice to do so. And the other source of information was the Force 11 website on citation of both software code and data. So that's another piece of information that Boris can use to provide his software and code with a proper citation. As we went with the project, we realized it's actually this website and this tool is also a very convenient way to develop your own learning paths by selecting your audience, by selecting your theme, by selecting your means, your type of information. You can, amongst all the different bits and pieces of information, create a series of information units that you can use to assemble your own course or your own student's curriculum or your own workshop or whatever. And to provide the more details, for example, this is a selection I made choosing data steward, choosing data management, using RDM tools, and in the planning phase of your research data lifecycle. And then it provides 4 nice units of information that you can actually use to assemble your own training module or unit. So there's in university from the Purdue information from Purdue University libraries on data management plan assessments, information from the National Institute of Standards and Technology on a guidance for reviewing data management plans, a nice piece of information from Science Europe, basically on data domain protocols. And then there is a website or information from our own Dutch National Science Foundation using rubrics to assess your data management plans. And this was very short what we created under the adoption project. You can actually help us. Well, I mean, I need to underline that the website itself is really a work in progress. It's not completed yet. It's not perfect yet. I think in the coming months we are improving it a lot and really make it useful for a lot of different communities and at the different levels of expertise. It still has some smaller and larger problems, but that's something we are working on in the coming months. Everybody's, I mean, you're invited to use it and to provide us with comments. And I think then we still also have some time for questions.
Thanks, Cees. Yes, please type in your questions in the question and answer box. And websites are always a work in progress, so it's great work again. It's fantastic. It's come a long way in 5 years. I remember the little flyers that we were creating with Michael Witt from Purdue way back when. So this has come a long way since then. Okay, any questions? Okay. I am going to show my screen and we'll be wrapping up. I know it's late for all of you, so thanks for hanging in there with us. I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Just a few wrap-up slides before we go. We've been promoting this quite a bit, but our recommendations and outputs catalog is an excellent way to find everything that RDA is doing, all of our community. The outputs are organized in a way that you can search by our official recommendations, our supporting outputs, our other outputs. If that's too much for you, you can just simply search by the status of them or what domain specific area you're looking for. And all these webinars that all this week are organized by the data lifecycle. So this is data management, this webinar, but we have organized all of our recommendations by data lifecycle topic as well. So feel free to check that out. And not only do we want you to adopt all these recommendations, but we know a lot of you have already adopted them, and sometimes we just hear about it in conversation or after the plenaries. We hear that some of these recommendations have already been done. But if you've adopted some, we want to hear from you. So I think Peter has a video out there where his adoption story is listed. I think we have 23 things out there too. But if you have a story, we want to profile you. So this link here, submit your story on the website. We'll email you the slides and the link as well in the follow-up emails. But we want to hear from you. And as we've been promoting for a while too, the CoData Data Science Journal, it has their call for papers. Their deadline was extended to July 17th. So this is another excellent way to get your stories out. I know in the US we're doing some work on this as well. We're planning on getting a submission in. So just wanted to make you aware of that. And just as lastly, this is our schedule. So today is a wrap. I think in a few short hours, we'll be doing some webinars on data description. We're trying to do our best to accommodate time zones. So if you can make any of those, register. All of the members of the Secretariat are going to be moderating. They've taken the lead, doing a lot of work all week on this. So if you can spend an hour and maybe listen and participate, that would be fantastic. We would really appreciate your engagement on that. And at that point, these are just our contact information. And if you need to hear from us, let us know. Contact us anytime. In the next 24 hours, we're just waiting for this recording to process, and we'll send the slides out to you by email. We'll get those for you and as a reference point. But share the word and let us get the word out to other people outside our community as well. And let's keep the adoption going. So at this point, I want to thank our speakers, Peter Neish, Rob Quick, and Cees Hoffman, and Marguerite. Thank you so much for taking the time out this morning to do it, and thanks to all of the attendees here for your participation. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to end the webinar now.